So here it is, guys, an amazing message for all of you guys at home. It's taken by our very own Mark Pomeroy. It's week 3 of I Love My Church.
Well, hey there, Elevate friends and family. Great to have you with us today. Now, it's 2025, and I've been saying that a lot lately. Not that I'm thinking you're not aware of that, but really because 2025 means that Elevate Church is turning or has turned 75 years old. And we know this because here's a picture of the founders. Well, they didn't think of themselves as the founders. They called themselves the Wayside Sunday School, launched a Sunday school from scratch in 1950, which eventually became a church and today is Elevate Church. So, they were the original pioneers. And look, we don't know them. We don't know much about them. We don't have names. We don't even know exactly where they met in terms of, we know it was a park, but we didn't even know which park. But I'm just like playing mind games. I'm wondering if they even thought they were going to become a church. And then to think, well, did they expect if they became a church that church would still be going 75 years later? I don't know. But what we do know and what we're being inspired by is they launched and created something from nothing, because that's what pioneers do. So we've launched this series called I Love My Church, and we're talking about 2025 in the context of pioneering, not from 75 years ago, although being very inspired by the Wayside people 75 years ago, but really saying now it's our turn. It's our turn to pioneer the next chapter. And here's the thing. God isn't calling us to just survive the next 75 years. He's calling us to thrive for the next 75 and maybe even 75 years plus. So that's the invitation. Become a pioneer. Don't be a settler. Now, the thing about pioneers and settlers, they have a different action plan. Like they would be known for different things, but preceding the things, the actions, actually the difference between pioneers and settlers is very much here. It's very much a mindset. Pioneers are all about creating something new, whereas settlers are more about plug and play. It already exists, just come in and all the hard work's done. Pioneers, their mindset is, I want to be somebody who God uses to build something that previously didn't exist, whereas settlers move into something that's already being established. And pioneers, they think generationally, whereas settlers primarily ask the question, what's in it for me now? And look, here's something important to know, and that is that pioneering takes faith, because two things. Number one, there's no guarantee that what you're pioneering is ultimately going to work. And secondly, there's a faith that's like, I'm going to keep going, and you don't even know how long it's going to take. That's the adventure, and I love it. And I'm a pioneer, and we're all in pioneering, and we're inviting you to join us to go all in 2025, pioneering the next chapter. Now, many of you and many of our Elevate people are already all in as pioneers, in particular our team members. And I'll just give you a couple of examples because, look, there's too many to mention. But this time last year, I approached one of our people and just pitched to them. I knew they were, super smart, a bit tech savvy, and so I invited them to join our media team. Now, they're a FIFO worker, a fly-in, fly-out worker, which is very common here in Perth. Means that they're only here every second weekend, and the other weekend they're away doing their job, their FIFO job. So I said, look, if you want to join our media team, that'd be great. There's an opportunity there. And look, I said to them, obviously I'm not, I know you're only here every second week. I'm not going to schedule you every second week. And they said, no. Please schedule me every second week. And literally a year later, apart from going on a couple of family vacations, they have been showing up prepared, in the seat, with energy, with passion, every second week for 12 months. That's about pioneers. And we've got a list of people who are pioneers, who are just all in about pioneering the next chapter of Elevate Church. This online experience has been edited by one such team member, and the list goes on. And then there's people not just giving of their time, there's people giving of their finances. A growing number of Elevate people that is saying, I want to, to God, I want to take a part of the financial, income that you've blessed me with, and I want to use that and give that and invest that into the mission of my church so that we can reach people and build people and pioneer the next chapter. It's brilliant. And look, I can tell you this, full disclosure, Louisa, my wife, and I, we are 100% leading by example. We're not the heroes, we're one of the heroes, but I'm just saying, we're not on the sidelines. We're not settlers. We're all in, pioneering this next chapter. And so the invitation is for you, if you're not already, to join us, to join our team members, to join our givers in going all in to pioneer the next chapter of Elevate Church. And what we've been doing in this series is actually going not back 75 years, we've been going back 2,000 years, because we have this great account of like some of the highlights of the early church, like a bit of a history book of the early church. It's called the Book of Acts. And week 1, we looked at Jesus giving the church, the very first pioneers, the mission to be my witnesses throughout all the world, which we translate as reach people and build people. Last week, we looked at the early church and what they prioritized, and the idea that they devoted themselves to teaching, to one another, and to prayer, and what that can mean for us. So listen, if you missed either of those first 2 weeks, go back and watch them either on this platform, or you can listen to them on your favorite podcast platform. Just search Elevate Church Perth and you'll find us. So what I want to do today is I want to look at the faith of the early church. Okay, so if you've got your smartphone, how about you scan this flow code? It's going to take you to Acts chapter 2, which is where we were in last week. I'm just going to read the next slice of history of the early church. While you're doing that, let me ask you a question. Have you ever found yourself just groaning in frustration because of something? 2 weeks ago, the internet connection to our church facilities, we call it the hub, stopped working. Which in 2025, we are, like you, super reliant on a fast, reliable internet connection. And it should have been an easy fix, but it wasn't. The internet service provider, ISP, that we had, they didn't pick up our calls. So one of our team members, after work from his regular job on a Thursday night, waited on hold for over 2 hours before saying, that's it, I need to go to bed. Got nowhere. I then picked up things the next day. We switched ISPs. It's like no point having an ISP if you can't even get them to pick up your phone call. Switched ISPs. They then organized for the repairers to come out. I went to meet them at the hub. I waited for nearly 5 hours. They didn't show up. Just as I was leaving, they phoned to say they'll be there in an hour. Well, this was 6 p.m., people. I got a family to have dinner with. So nope. Then, okay, we rescheduled several days later, and I went in again to the hub, and I was there for another 3+ hours. Here's the thing. Between our first team member and myself, we devoted nearly 10 hours of our life to get the internet reconnected. groaning. And look, that's life. Life can be that way sometimes. But I want to put it to you today that the early church gives us a reminder of actually how we can move beyond the and actually get our awe back, actually live with a sense of awe about who God is and what he's doing in our lives and in the lives of the people around us, particularly in our church community. So verse 43, Luke records this: a deep sense of awe came over them all. This meaning the early church, the first pioneers, and the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. See, one of the things that made this early church stand out is they believed that God was and is in the miracle business. It's like if they were living today, they'd be sending themselves the mind-blowing emoji. We've got reasons to use the mind-blowing emoji. Here's just one. Ready for this? Did you know that you can see your nose at all times, but your brain chooses to ignore it? And if you don't believe me, here's a little test. Close one eye. Yeah. Yep. There it is. Your nose. Mind blowing. But the early church, they weren't just looking for fun facts about noses and so on and so forth. No, the early church, they were having their mind blown by God who was and is in the miracle business. Peter, one of the early leaders of the church, he preached one message, and on that particular day, when he preached the one message, 3,000 people made a decision to follow Jesus. That's the greatest miracle of all, when even just one person makes that decision. And yet here we have 3,000 people making that decision. Another time, a crippled man was brought to Peter, same guy, and he prayed for that crippled man, and that crippled man was able to walk. People took handkerchiefs and aprons that Paul, again, one of the leaders of the early church, had worn or had used, and just took them out and laid them on sick people. Paul wasn't even there. These were just the handkerchiefs and the aprons that he used, laid them on sick people, and they got healed. I mean, this was just like... So no wonder the early church were in awe, because God kept blowing their minds. Paul prayed for a guy who was dead, and he got raised back to life. Come on now. Now, the book of Acts records about 30 years of the history of the early church and records 29 separate miracles. There's likely many, many, many more, but even just these 29 are like, wow. And I believe that the same God who was moving and working back then, the God who the early church believed was and is in the miracle business, is still in the miracle business today. Now, I'm going to put it to you, and looking at the early church, and I just said, believe this is still true today, that there's kind of 4 groups or 4 types of miracles that God specializes in. The first one is miracles of restoration. You know, this includes physical healing. And if you go to our Elevate Church AU app, download that if you haven't already got that. You can go to our stories section, and you'll see stories of people even being healed from cancer. God did that. God does that. God is doing that. You know, I've seen God restore relationships. We had someone come to our church several years ago, and they had broken up or separated from their spouse, and I met them, and they said it was irreconcilable. It was over, no way, divorce was inevitable, and less than a year, well, about a year later, God had worked a miracle, and yeah, they'd involve counselors and all sorts of things that God used to ultimately get back together and thrive in the next chapter of their marriage. God is in the miracle of restoration business. And like I said, when 3,000 people committed to follow Jesus, I'm seeing that today. People having the greatest restoration of all, having their relationship with God restored. Now, there's another category called miracles of provision. And we kind of, I don't know, maybe default to finances as being the way this plays out, which it does. And that doesn't mean that tomorrow someone's going to drop a brand new Mercedes in your driveway. They might. But look, it's God. He might be using your job. He might be using your business. He just to financially provide for you, but it's not limited to provision. God provides opportunities to his kids that you might not otherwise have been able to receive. Then there's miracles of guidance. You know, this is where God will just like lead you to things, lead you through things, maybe even keep you away from some things. Danger alert. Should I take that job? Should I marry that guy? Should we buy that house? Should I move to that location? And God communicates and guides us through his word, through his spirit, and in the context of this series, he actually guides us through his church, through wise people that he's put around us, people that will pray for us, people that will give us some good, godly perspectives. Which, one of the saddest things that I've seen when it comes to miracles of guidance and God wanting to use his people is we live in an increasingly individualistic society, and I've seen that creep into the church, where people are just making decisions, important decisions, without consulting anyone. And they'll they'll announce the decision they've already made. And if it's a big decision, I'll ask them, who did you bounce this around with? And these days, the majority of the time, I just get a glazed response like, huh? What do you mean? It's like, so God guides us through his word, his spirit, and his church, and then miracles of freedom. Freedom from our past, freedom from small thinking, freedom from old patterns, freedom from things that have held us back. These are miracles that God did, God does, and God wants to do. Now, there is a lane of church in the church world, people that run in a particular lane, and they believe that these miracles that we read about in the book of Acts actually stopped with the early church. Like as soon as you finish reading the book of Acts, that's it. No more miracles. And I'm not here to pick a fight with them or anyone else, but I want to go on record as just to say that I don't run in that lane. And I don't run in that lane because I continue to see God do miracles in this day, 2025, and I believe that God wants to continue to do more and more miracles into the future. So part of us pioneering the next chapter of Elevate Church is to lean into and have faith in the God who is in the miracle business and be in awe of that. Then Luke records that all the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day, met in homes for the Lord's Supper, and shared their meals with great joy and generosity, all while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all people. Now, you might read that and you think they sold their possessions and feeling a bit nervous. Does that mean I have to sell my home? Well, no. Take a breath. Because first of all, it doesn't say they sold all their possessions. It's just this idea that they lived open-handed and that if someone needed something, one of the ways they ensured that person got what they needed was they were even willing to sell something they owned to free up some resources to then be generous with somebody else. I mean, this idea of like selling everything and like moving to the hills in like a commune, well, that just sounds like a Netflix documentary waiting to happen. But you will see in the early church that generosity and joy are connected. This idea that as we commit to be someone else's miracle, to be used by God to provide for someone else, that we in turn grow and experience more joy in our lives. If you want to experience more joy, be more generous. And I'll just finish with this. There's 3 areas. It's pretty standard, but I'm going to say it anyway. 3 areas that we can be and, in fact, grow in generosity as we pioneer the next chapter. The first one is our time. And here's the thing. There was a time, no pun intended, when like the hardest thing for some people to give was money, like because it was a scarce resource. I think these days, in many cases, the hardest thing to give is time. And so this idea of intentionally carving out and prioritizing some of our time in the service of others is like an even bigger statement, even bigger gesture than giving money, although I'll come to the money piece. So giving time, giving talents, God's blessed us, blessed you, wired you, equipped you, gifted you with some talents, and he calls us, particularly as we're pioneering the next chapter, to take them and use them to be someone else's miracle. And then thirdly, yes, is treasure. This idea that God calls us and invites us to take a percentage of the financial resources he's blessed us with to be a miracle in the lives of someone else, to ensure his church is well resourced financially so that we can do the things that God's calling us. We can be more effective in the mission that God's given us. And here's like the thing. One of the reasons this brings great joy is when you and I commit ourselves to be someone else's miracle. When they experience the miracle, that part of their story becomes a part of your story and my story as well. So let's be people who allow God, the God who is still in the miracle business, to blow our minds, have faith that he can, does, and will do miracles. And secondly, live with open hands and open hearts and a priority for other people, that God would use you and use me to be a miracle in the lives of other people.